Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
I welcome you to a two-part series addressing leadership. Today our guest is authored a book that is of great interest, and we're going to, on these two programs, discuss with him the contents of the book, and it is titled Leadership for All the Mountains You Climb, with the subtitle While Loving the View. It is published by Author House, and it is available. We'll talk more about it. It's on the screen now, as you can see, and very interesting book. Our guest comes to us with some really impressive credentials. First of all, he served in the United States Army for 20 years, where he left with the rank of major. Mr. Mark Altman holds a bachelor's degree in applied arts and sciences, history, political science from Stephen F. Austin State University. He also received a master's from the same institution in interdisciplinary leadership, political science, and counseling. Our guest at the moment is working on his PhD at Gonzaga University, again in leadership studies. So, Mark, it's a pleasure welcoming you to the program, and you certainly come with very interesting credentials, and we appreciate the opportunity to examine your book with you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
And as always, I'm pleased to have our two regular panelists, Janelle Burke, who's an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Erna Reinhardt, who is Director of Public Relations at North Idaho College, and we shall invite Janelle to start today's questioning.
Welcome to the program, Mark. It's going to be fun to talk about this leadership issue. Can you give us some background as to ways that people have traditionally thought about leadership?
Sure. In the past, the first initial study of leadership was a trait theory based, where people viewed it that leaders had certain traits, superior intelligence, strength, those kind of traits, and that those traits were what made someone a good leader. After a period of time, we realized that trait theory had some limitations, and so we then began to look at a leader's behaviors. And again, behaviors were then taken into account, that leaders had certain behaviors. In some cases, aggression, being articulate, charisma, some of those kinds of behaviors. And again, we found that that behavior model had some limitations. And so the next thing to be looked at were situations. We've often heard of it said of presidents, do presidents make the time, or do the times make the president? That's where some of that comes from. And so we moved to a situational based model. And again, we found that that model had some limitations. In modern times, or in current times, leadership theory has now come back around a bit to the trait-based model. We do realize, even though we had kind of debunked that model long ago, we're now realizing that, no, wait a minute, leaders do have certain traits, and in fact, they do exhibit certain behaviors. And in fact, if you put a leader in the right situation, they'll do well, and if you put them in the wrong situation, very often they won't do well. And so we're beginning to come around to a more holistic view that any one of those theories is not necessarily right, but that all of them in total deliver a better picture.
Thank you.
Erna Reinhardt.
Mark, welcome to the show. It's
Thank
great
you.
to have you here. A great topic. Share with us your interest. How did you get interested in this field? You have become a scholar in this field, so share with us, how did you get interested in this?
Well, I think my earliest foray into leadership was whenever I was a kid, when I was in the Boy Scouts of America, and you have to learn leadership and learn how to motivate others to accomplish tasks. And I think that was the beginning of it. And then, of course, when I went into the Army, as you can imagine, there's a certain amount of leadership that's exhibited there. And I was enlisted for the first 4 years, but then got out and got a degree and a commission and went back in as an officer. And certainly as an officer, the government invests and the Army invests a large amount of money into every officer, teaching them leadership and enhancing their leadership ability. And it was through that part of my life that I began to realize that the serving of others is important, that service piece, and it wasn't until my master's degree when I ran into the work of a gentleman named Robert Greenleaf, and he wrote a book called Servant Leadership, and many people now have heard of it. What they may not know is that essay was actually based upon a book by Hermann Hesse called Journey to the East. And in Journey to the East, there is a group of travelers, for lack of a better word, going across the East. And the group is very dysfunctional until a gentleman joins the group. Actually, he wasn't a gentleman, he was a servant to the group. He was the guy who navigated and got water and did the most menial of tasks. But he did the tasks that were necessary for the group's existence and survival and their movement on the journey. Well, eventually he leaves the group, and the group breaks up because they no longer have a leader. And one of the people in the book goes on to a monastery and finds the monks there, and he says to them in kind of a haughty way, "I want to talk to your leader." And of course, who is there? Who is the leader of the monastery but the very servant that was on the trip? And so that therein lies the lesson. So anyway, that work was the kernel for servant leadership, and that's reading that book. A light bulb went off in my head from my time in the Army. Many people won't believe this, but in the Army, servant leadership has been encouraged for, well, certainly all of my career, and I would guess probably 50 years. So,
share with us some of those key principles in servant leadership.
Well, the first thing would be, as you can imagine, a sense of selfless service, both to the organization and to the people around you. In fact, in my book, I label that kind of care and compassion using an old koine or common Greek term called filial love. It is different from agape in the sense that filial love, you must have a relationship or know the person that you are loving, whereas in agape love, you don't have to know the person. And of course, all of us know about eros or erotic love, and certainly in that relationship, you know the person, but that's a very different kind of love. So that's the first thing that you have to have is a sense of filial love or care and compassion. The next thing that you'd have to have is a vision, a sense of vision. Where are we going to go? If I said to all of you, hey, let's get up right now and go eat lunch, well, you might want to know, well, where are we going to eat lunch? And, how are we going to get there? And whose car are we going in? And you want to know some things about that, right? Then the next thing you have to have is a sense of power. In our society, at least right now, we tend to think of power as a bad thing. And my guess is it's because we have this common perception that power is always bad, when in fact I would very likely argue that power is normally used for good. It's just that we don't notice it when it's used for good. We normally notice it when it's used for illicit purposes or bad purposes. And then the last thing you have to have is management skills. You have to be able to manage resources and time well enough to take advantage of opportunity and overcome obstacles. And so the model itself is really pretty simple.
Awesome.
I'm going to focus in on number 2, vision. As someone who teaches political science, I'm very interested in political leadership. And if you look at our history of, we rank, we might not always be accurate, but we rank our presidents, some of the great presidents like Abraham Lincoln or Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, there are others. One thing that they seem to have always had in common is that they didn't make decisions on the immediacy of the present, but they were visionary. And other leaders simply don't have that. And not only speaking of presidents, but it happens even outside the arena of politics. And I've always believed that that's not something you can teach. Am I wrong? It seems to be almost an innate ability for some people to be able to anticipate that some decisions may have consequences in the future.
Right. It's interesting that you say that. I think that the reason that I say that it is interesting is because I think it can be taught. The problem is it is typically taught when long before we've met the adult, right? It's typically taught as a child. I mean, the parents and the other mentors and teachers of that child provide both a safety net to be able to dream, the encouragement to dream, and then they begin to translate what you might call a dream into a vision. And if that growth is stunted early on, then like with any other growth, whether it's learning math or anything else, learning how to love for that matter, If that growth is stunted early on, then you have to put far more investment to make up what was missed than you would have had you been able to invest all along. It's much like an investment. It pays interest as you grow older. So I argue that that's largely why you see that, is that those people were not taught how to vision and were not taught how to dream and then encouraged and allowed to dream along the way.
I always love playing the devil's advocate in these situations, you know, although your comments are most interesting. Can you reach a point in life to where if it's been stunted in early years that even if you try to teach it, it can never be successful as it would have been in early? I'm thinking of one political leader who once said, what is that visionary thing? I don't understand it. Whereas other people grab right onto it. So what is your view concerning being behind the curve in dealing with visionary characteristics?
Well, I mean, I guess if someone was so stunted that we might call them dysfunctional or broken somehow, then I guess you could say that it would be, I hate to say never. I would say that, again, the investment necessary by them and by the people around them would be significant, or could be significant. Now, the other thing I would say in political leadership, you have a bit of a curve thrown in there because, and I believe we were talking about this before, that now there's an entire field of study called complex adaptive systems, or CAS for short. Right. And so sometimes if you're looking at a complex adaptive system, and certainly our government, our national government, even our local government would be a complex adaptive system, you have to have the requisite education and breadth of mind. I mean, even if it's not a formal education, the breadth of mind to be able to reach out and encompass a large amount of information that's always changing, and to be able to kind of, what to others would seem intuitive, when in fact it's probably not intuitive, but to an outside observer, it could seem very intuitive, that you kind of grasp that much of that entirety and be able to manipulate it in a positive way.
Janelle Burke.
Well, Tony asked you about the second component. I want to go back to the first component,
Sure.
the filial love for the people that you are going to be leading. Now, of course, you can't lead if you don't have anyone to follow. So what would you say about this particular component? How would you describe that in more detail?
Okay, I think that I would say that filial love is, at its base, a simple care and compassion and empathy and sympathy, for that matter, of others. That you put others' needs before your own. And the thing about filial love is, or care and compassion, empathy, any of those things, you can't fake it. I mean, you can get away with it for, a short period of time, but fairly quickly people tend to figure you out. And of course, that's much more destructive than if you had just been open and honest to begin with and said, hey, listen, I'm using you, you're using me. I mean, in fact, James McGregor Burns calls that transactional leadership, right? I have something you want, you have something I want, and as long as that's a mutually agreeable situation, we move down the road. When that ceases to be an agreeable situation, then we part company. Maybe one day we'll come back together, and then again, maybe we won't. So, but in the case of filial love, again, it's this care and compassion for each other, this idea that I know, I'll give an example of a company. In an organization, in a company, a for-profit company, the idea, of course, is to make money. We call it the bottom line. Everyone's heard that. But this idea of filial love says, no. My first obligation is to the people, both my customers, the people who work here, my vendors. It's to the relationship. I know that when I leave this earth, I want to leave something behind. And it's those relationships that matter most to me. However, because of my sense of care and compassion, and because of my caring leadership, the bottom line is going to be blacker than it had been if I had it backward. And in fact, we see this in a number of organizations where they have been able to achieve much greater success. They feel that they have achieved much greater success than they had if they had only focused on the here and now, the what's important at the moment, as Tony pointed out a minute ago.
Ernie Reinhardt.
Mark, share with us what inspired you to write the book, and who did you write the book for, and what is your book's message?
Well, I would say that I wrote the book for everyone. I think that parents certainly can get something out of it. I think that because again, in a parenting relationship, for example, or a marital relationship for that matter, there are power relationships to be discussed. There's certainly, at least hopefully, there's a care and compassion. We hope that the parents have come together and had a vision of where they would like to see the family go and how they would like to see the children grow and so on. Again, there is a sense of power, and that's kind of the thing the important thing in that relationship is when a child is little, for a variety of reasons. One, they're reliant on the parent, not least of which. There's a real power relationship there, right? Mom and dad or dad say to do something, and there you are. It happens that way. On the other hand, as a child gets older, certainly by their teenage years, they begin to realize, hey, wait a minute, I'm my own autonomous being, and while mom and dad may be able to make it economically or maybe in other ways painful, if you will, socially painful for me, I still can choose to do what I want. And so that power relationship begins to change as the child takes on more of the power in the relationship. And so a parent can't, or would find it very difficult anyway, to rely solely on power as their method of raising a family. And then, of course, anyone who's ever been a parent realizes that there are certainly some management skills that go into raising a family, whether it's, trying to get 3 kids to 4 different places on the same night, or the monetary budget, or just figuring out what to have for dinner. I mean, there's some management skills that go in there. I would say that a nonprofit organization certainly would benefit from the book. Again, you have the same, while the entities are labeled different things, certainly you have boards of trustees, you have your other constituents that you serve, you have money coming in and out, there's power there, there's management skills, there's hopefully a vision for where the organization wishes to head. In a for-profit company, again, the same thing, they're labeled a little bit differently, but the same basic stakeholders exist. So I think that everybody can gain something out of the book, and even if they don't buy the entire theory, certainly it gives another lens with which to look at their organization, and I think that in of itself is valuable.
Great.
I keep going back to political leaders. I wonder why teaching in that field. My observation, empirical evidence, and a lot of political science have talked about this, when people are running for office, some individuals are just absolute masters at communication. They really know how to connect with the citizenry, and then they get in office and they're not good administrators, and therefore their administration, whatever level it is, may not be very successful. There are other leaders who almost barely get in because their communication skills are somewhat limited, but they're great administrators. And then there's those that are both. Would you spend a little time talking about that as we've observed it over time in those 3 different examples?
Sure. In political leadership, I think you still have the same 4 components. I think you're right. I think there are certainly everything from presidents down to mayors that we can identify. I mean, if we were to choose to do so, we could identify those people and say, boy, they really had all 4 of those things. They cared about the people they were serving. They certainly had a vision. They did have a sense of power, whether it was because of the historical context or their money or some other reason. And they had the management skills required. There are other presidents like Eisenhower, for example, as an example, who, while he may have had the management skills, we won't really ever know, largely because he said, you know what? I'm the chief executive, and I don't want to have my fingers in every little pie, so I'm going to hire really smart people, and I'm going to let them do what they do. And if they don't or can't do it, I'll get rid of them and I'll find some people who can do it. And then there are people, I think you're right, who, whether by accident of history or some other quirk of fate, they find themselves in a position that they're over their head and they struggle. I mean, Grant certainly comes to mind in that regard. 7 of the 8 of his cabinet ended up either in prison or committing suicide by the end of the administration. So I think that's an example. Andrew Johnson, of course, when he took over for Lincoln, found himself in an almost unwinnable situation. So, in fact, poor Andrew Johnson, he might be an unfair guy to use as an example, quite frankly. But
he was maybe as a victim of the environment.
That's right, exactly. But anyway, my point being that management skills, frankly, I find to be the least important of the four components, only because, like Eisenhower, like Lincoln, like a number of others that I can think of, TR, they hired out their management skills.
Well,
they said
that's available.
Right. They said, listen, we can, and of course at the national level, at almost any point in history, there are people available to be good managers for you. And they said, we're going to sit up on a little higher level, not meaning above everyone, but more from a perspective sense. I'm going to sit above everyone, and I'm going to direct the action and make some larger decisions.
And rally the people, like it's called the bully pulpit.
That's right. Yeah, exactly right.
Well, in relation to that, to hire those outstanding managers, the great leader must also be so self-confident that they don't mind hiring someone who's just brighter than they.
Right.
And some individuals have trouble doing that.
That's exactly right. And the interesting thing there, in fact, in business now, I'll give an example. I was working for a company for a time, and I won't say who it was, but there was a young lady that I hired right out of college. And when I hired her, I said, if you're here 6 months, I will teach you everything that I know about doing this. And when I told her that and began to make good on my word, one of the vice presidents came to me and said, Mark, I heard that you're teaching her essentially everything you know about how to do this. And I said, why, certainly I am. And he says, well, is that a good idea? And I said, what do you mean? And he says, well, she makes half your salary, in fact, less than half your salary, and if you teach her everything you know, why won't we fire you and just keep her? And I said, and you could do that. You certainly could. However, if you were so short-sighted that you would let go someone who can teach others how to do what they do, then quite frankly, this is not the place for me in the first place. And I think that's true at every level. I think that we owe it to those. I think we owe it to the organization, first of all, but certainly I think we owe it to those people who work with us and for us to share our knowledge with them and make them better, I guess, for lack of a better word, to make them better and allow them to achieve what they can achieve. And together then, the entire organization takes a huge leap forward.
Thank you very much. Janelle Burke.
I want to follow up with Tony's question. A wise person once told me that it is always better to have people who disagree around you, because you will get the whole picture as opposed to having only yes people around you. So can you speak to that as far as leadership is concerned? What do you look for so that you're not finding that you're getting all the same answers to every question that you ask, so you get the big picture?
Sure. I think that's a question of loyalty. Quite actually, I believe that it is disloyal to be a yes man or yes woman, as the case may be. Real loyalty is being willing to stand up in an organization, and politely, certainly, and respectfully, and I don't just mean respectful of a boss, but I mean of everyone around you, to respectfully say, wait, I disagree, I think we're going in the wrong direction, and then hopefully you have some kind of argument to back that up, and to be able to, and to be free to say that, to be able to help the organization for the long term, as opposed to, well, let's all of us lemmings to agree to run right off the cliff. I mean, I don't find that to be loyal to an organization, or for that matter, to a boss. I mean, if you're going to sit there and say, yeah, Tony, we ought to do this and that, you're absolutely right, buddy, knowing the whole time that we shouldn't, and then it fails miserably, well, what favor have I done to you?
In fact, my job then could be at stake as well as yours.
Sure. Well, not just your job, but I mean your reputation,
yes.
your livelihood, the organization. I mean, if I'm a yes man in this case, if I'm a yes man to Tony, right, and all of us then go to economic ruin in our company, I mean, I've not only done him a disservice, but I've done you a disservice as well.
But as a leader, how do you promote that kind of
Sure.
freedom for people to be able to say what they think?
I think the first thing, the most important thing, is to underwrite mistakes. You know, as Truman would say, the buck stops here. And of course, while he meant that at the presidential level, I think that all of us should take a page from his book and have a placard on our desk that says, the buck stops here. And by that, you really mean that when it comes to, in fact, there's a popular saying, something rolls downhill. And I argue that's exactly the wrong attitude. When the boss comes to you and they're upset about something that's gone wrong, you do not turn and transfer that down the line just because you can. Mm-hmm. You say, I understand, I'll fix it, I'll make it happen. And then you go back to your own part of the organization and say, hey guys, we really made a mistake, we need to fix this. And the fact of the matter is, most organizations, the relationships are so close and small. The other folks know what's just happened. And so you've just engendered a lot of loyalty from them when they're able to go, wow, I know Mark just really caught it. And by the way, that was my mistake that he really caught it from. And so that, as you can imagine, that engenders a real sense of loyalty from your subordinates when that happens.
We're just about out of time, and you'll be back next week, but some of our viewers may want to, during this week, look at your website or your book. And so it's been up on the screen, but also let's tell our viewers, what is your website?
It's www.altmanleadershipcenter.com.
So once again, www.altmanleadershipcenter.com. Well, Mark, it's been a pleasure having you here, and it's most interesting, and one can talk about this for a long time, and we will again next week. And I will also remind the viewers again that the book is called Leadership for All the Mountains You Climb While Loving the View. And we've had it up on the screen earlier what the book looks like, and as I just indicated, that we will come back next week and talk about other things we didn't get to today. And you are most articulate, and I'm sure that you create a lot of interest, particularly in people who are already in leadership positions or have ambitions to do so. And I was very impressed by your 4 areas of characteristics and all. And again, Mark, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, as I've indicated, our guest has been Mark Altman, and discussing his book, and we shall continue that discussion next week. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.